Hello, church. Welcome to this week's message. My name is Henry Loke. This is God's Feeding Station. It is an honor to be with you again today as we are going to finish up, chapter 14 of Isaiah today. We're in verses 28 through 32, and it is the beginning of a series of judgments on the nations surrounding Israel, nations that Judah might be thinking about entering into an alliance with the upcoming incursions of Assyria and Babylon, these Mesopotamian armies. But the issue is those nations are under God's judgment as well. So why would you partner up with somebody that God has destined to fail? And why would you partner with somebody who doesn't even acknowledge that God exists? So Judah's only hope for deliverance is God. That much is I think blatant up to this point, of almost a year of doing Isaiah. It's been a lot of repetition, but it is driving home that fact that God is the only hope for Judah. He is the only hope for any nation. And he is the only ultimate power in the universe. But the problem is we get so ingrained in the way the world works. And so we rely on horizontal common sense or horizontal help rather than vertical, right? Rather than looking to God. That's the tendency. The nations of the world, when you get involved in situations like Judah finds herself in, it's to look on the horizontal and not to the vertical. We look to might, we look to weapons, we look to whatever the world says you conduct warfare with, rather than looking to God to guide and to lead and to deliver. So Philistia, now, and that's the nation we're talking about today, is now in the crosshairs of the advancing Assyrian army. And and Isaiah's point today is going to be to Judah is, why would you, again, look to a nation that is far weaker, even on a horizontal plane, far weaker than the Assyrian hordes that are coming? Why would you look to them? And more importantly, from a vertical perspective, why would you look to them? So we begin today in verses 28 and 29. In the year that King Ahaz died came this oracle. Rejoice not, O Philistia, all of you, that the rod that struck you is broken. For from the serpent's root will come forth an adder, and its fruit will be a flying fiery serpent. Now, there are a couple of timing issues here. And you're going to get a lot of history today. And I'm going to give you a place to look to brush up on your history if you're interested, because we're not going to get into a lot of detail, but I'm going to throw a lot of dates and names and things at you today. So if you're taking notes, or if you have your Bibles open, or you're interested in the background of the historical context of all of this, I would encourage you definitely to be Bereans in that sense and go look these things up. So a couple of timing issues with this broken rod or staff, depending on what verse or what translation you're reading. There's no precise agreement on the death of Ahaz. 2 Kings 18 has Hezekiah's reign beginning in 727 BC. Hezekiah is the king that follows Ahaz. But verse 13 of 2 Kings 18 tells us that Sennacherib's attack begins in 701, and it says it's 14 years into the year of Hezekiah's reign, which would make his ascent to the throne somewhere around 715 or 716. Now, we don't know, again, did Ahaz get sick and have to abdicate, or is there a question on the date side? Not sure. The 715, 716 dates coincide with a known revolt in Philistia against Assyria. And we'll talk about that when we get to Isaiah 20. But we also know that the Philistines didn't really suffer at the hands of Ahaz, because if you go to 2 Chronicles 28, verse 18, it says, "And the Philistines had made raids on the cities in the Shephelah and the Negeb of Judah, and had taken Beth Shemesh, Ajalon, Gederoth, Soko with its villages, Timnah with its villages, and Gimzo with its villages, and they settled there." So the Philistines kind of had their way with Ahaz, so Ahaz wasn't a big threat to them. So there's that issue. Verse 31 says that trouble for Philistia is coming from the north. Judah lies to her west. So if this were an attack coming from Judah, there's a discrepancy in the direction of the coming onslaught. So what is the rod? It could be a symbol of the Davidic monarchy, which is in a shambles at this point. It was in disarray. We know shortly after Solomon's reign, the kingdom is split, and the kings drift away from God. And so things are chaotic, to say the least. There's a recent thought that the rod refers to an Assyrian monarch who died around the same time as Ahaz. And Tiglath-Pileser III died around 727. So could it be referring to that? I think where most people land in all of this is that when you consider Ahaz may have died at 715, when Hezekiah ascended the throne, and you know that Philistine revolt was happening around the same time, this rod doesn't refer to anyone in particular. It could refer to Assyria, and this is where people land now. There was a weakness seen in Assyria at that time, which prompted the discussion then of Judah and Philistia joining forces to combat Assyria. And when you look at all of that evidence, and trust me, I've scrunched it down for you today because it gets pretty involved and pretty complicated. When you look at that, that's probably the most likely scenario. There was a chink in the armor of Assyria that was seen. And so Philistia now sent envoys to Judah to say, hey, we may have an opportunity here. What do you think about joining forces and battling Assyria? And that kind of makes more sense than all the other arguments. And so I'll say that's probably most likely what this refers to. But I'm not the history. I mean, that's your history lesson for the day. I'm not the historical scholar, but logically that seems to make more sense. You can go to a website called lifehopeandtruth.org. They deal with a lot of things like prophecy and Daniel and Revelations, but they explain a lot of the history. Like when you get to Daniel and the statue that's made of all the different materials, how those all apply to different kingdoms, and they will explain all those things and the history of some of those kingdoms. And there's a lot of that will backfill a lot of the detail that we talked about today. So, but regardless, God is saying to the Philistines, you're under my judgment. And things are you shouldn't be rejoicing in the things you're rejoicing of, because you have no acknowledgement of me. And that is going to bring judgment and a lot of problems for you. So we move on to verse 30. And the firstborn of the poor will graze, and the needy lie down in safety. But I will kill your root with famine, and your remnant it will slay. The picture here is sheep in a pasture. And what the sheep represent here is the most needy of the land, the very poorest of the people. And when you think about that, think about what you know or what you might know about the common tactics of warfare back in these days just from reading the Bible. You don't have to be a history buff to understand that a common tactic was to surround the city, lay siege to it, or just cut it off and starve the people out, because then they would be too weak to put up any resistance to being overtaken or slaughtered. So that was a common tactic used by many of the armies in this day. And the sheep pictured in verse 30 are a picture of the poorest and the weakest and the neediest, and those that are probably too weak to defend themselves against any army, let alone the Assyrian army. And in this picture, what God is saying is, you got to depend on me. I don't care what you have. I don't care what you don't have. I don't care how weak you are perceived by others. Rely on me. Think about how God led Israel into all those battles. Think about the stories of Gideon and such, where they faced overwhelming numbers and yet somehow prevailed by the power of God. That's how they prevailed. And so the weak who depend on God are stronger than the strongest of any nation. And God has shown that and proved that over and over and over again. So our last two verses today, 31 and 32. Wail, O gate, cry out, O city, melt in fear, O Philistia, all of you. For smoke comes out of the north, and there is no stranger in his ranks. What will one answer the messengers of the nation? The Lord has founded Zion, and in her the afflicted of his people find refuge. Right? God gives them the answer they should give the envoys of Philistia. You're not going to partner with them. You're not going to rely on them because they can't help you. The God who founded Israel, the God who set up this nation and destined these people to be a nation, those are the ones that take refuge in God, and those are the ones that will survive this thing. Because the destruction of Philistia is a foregone conclusion as far as God's concerned. And again, as I said earlier, the picture here is destruction coming out of the north, smoke coming out of the north. And it could mean a couple of different things. Excuse me. It could mean that it is just the dust that's kicked up by this massive army that is making its way south. It could be a frightening picture of smoke billowing up from all the villages and towns and cities that the Assyrian army has ransacked. And what you see now is just all this smoke from the fires and the destruction left behind by the army. But that's what's coming. And so these messengers now from Philistia have shown up and have presented to Judah a pact. Can we join forces? Can we together fend off this approaching army? And what God says is, even the gates should wail, right? Again, part of the tactics of warfare, a lot of the battle would center around the gate, because armies like the Assyrian army would build these siege works and battering rams. These engineers would build these massive structures, and they would wheel them up to the front gate and start trying to knock the gate down or trying to knock the walls down. And so the battles often surged around those types of areas. And so God is saying, wail, because it's not going to go well. When this army shows up and doing it, and again, the Assyrian army is doing God's bidding. When this army shows up, it is not going to be pretty, but it is judgment that is being brought upon the nations because of their lack of faith, their lack of obedience. In some cases, their lack of just mere acknowledgement of God. In Israel's case, it's lack of obedience. And so this is what's happening. And we must see God at work here. This is all, this destruction of the Philistines and the judgment that is coming upon the nations here. And Isaiah is going to lay all this out in the coming chapters. It's all brought about by God. And as God says, there's only one answer to give them. The God who established the nation is where the people should seek refuge, in whom they should seek refuge. And it's a hard thing to learn. When you're entrenched in politics, politics works a certain way, right? And so when things happen, nations are conditioned to respond in certain ways. Just over the last, from recording this, the last 24 hours, not even, there's rumblings again of Israel attacking Iran. We have no control over that, right? And so who do we trust in? I mean, if that blows up, who knows what's going to happen? A lot of fear surrounding that type of attack. I know that we've been evacuating people out of the Middle East because of what we see or what we perceive as, what we perceive might happen. So we have no control over this. What we do have control is, again, over who do we turn to, in whom do we trust. And we're to trust in God. Like Isaiah is saying to Judah, we have to turn to the one, the only one who can save us, who can deliver us from the current situations. And it's worldly situations or spiritual situations. A lot of spiritual battles going on these days. Same thing. So, like Judah, we should turn to God in the midst of all the things that are going on. We have that choice to make. For us here, we have that choice to make in our daily lives, whatever things we're facing. Who do we turn to? Who do we rely on? From a nation running standpoint, it's up to the politicians. It's up to those who God has put in power to turn to him and rely on him. You think about all the wars that have been fought over the years. They've been fought on the horizontal. And it doesn't matter how many we fought and won or lost, we're still as unstable as we've ever been. And so, we fool ourselves, we kid ourselves when we think our wealth or our armies or the genius of our generals are what's going to save us. We can't rely on those things because they're all flawed. They're all worldly. And they're all of human construction. And humans are flawed. We have sin in us. And the motivations behind some people may not always be just or right. So we can't put our faith in those things. Stability and certainty must either come from God, from a God-fearing nation, or it does not exist. Plain and simple. You look at the history of Israel. When Israel was in step and in line with God, they were at peace most of the time. It's when they turned from God that God handed them over to calamities and nations to get them to turn, to get them to obey him again, or to bring judgment upon them for their refusal to do so. You think about it. Jacob, using Jacob as Israel, Jacob could not save himself, right? We cannot save ourselves. Jesus says in Luke 9, for whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. So that's what it comes down to. Are we willing to surrender ourselves to God and trust in him and turn to him as our refuge? Because only those who truly understand from whence they came, who have lost their lives in dependence on God, they are the ones, only they are the ones who are truly secure regardless of the chaos the world brings.